I raised him alone after his mother died. I skipped meals so he could eat, walked to work so he could ride the school bus. And when my health collapsed, I gave him the last $8,000 I had, meant for my surgery. He promised to take care of everything. But instead, he bought his girlfriend a diamond bracelet. When I saw her flaunting it on Instagram, tagged with his name, I didn't feel anger. I felt something colder. That's the day my heart finally broke, and not because of illness. When Maria died, it wasn't just a car crash that took her. It was like the whole world caved in, and I was the only one left standing in the wreckage. We were living in a small rented house in Wichita, Kansas. Daniel was only 5. Too young to understand what the word widower meant. Too young to know why his mother wasn't coming home with groceries that day. The roads were slick with early March rain. The other driver was a teenager, texting, drunk, or both. I never found out. I never asked. Because no explanation was going to bring her back. I remember sitting on the floor that night, in the kitchen, holding Daniel in my arms as he asked, over and over, "When's Mama coming home?" I didn't answer. I just held him tighter until his little chest stopped shaking. That was the moment I realized. I didn't have time to fall apart. Not with those tiny hands clinging to my shirt like I was the only thing keeping him safe. Grief didn't ask me for permission. It just moved in. But it couldn't live loud. Not around Daniel. I started waking up 2 hours earlier every morning just to cry in the bathroom without him seeing. Then I'd wash my face, put on my work boots, and pack his school lunch like nothing had changed. We didn't have much. I worked as a city bus driver during the day and mopped floors at a local office building at night. I'd come home around midnight, sore and bone-tired, but Daniel would sometimes still be awake, waiting for a bedtime story. I never told him no. Not once. Even if I'd had a day that made my body feel twice my age, I'd read him The Giving Tree or Goodnight Moon with a cracked voice and a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. People used to ask me, "How are you doing all this on your own?" I didn't have an answer. Because the truth is, I wasn't doing it for me. I was doing it because of him. Daniel was the only thing that still made sense in a world that no longer did. His little hands, the way he scribbled DAD on construction paper for Father's Day, the way he'd fall asleep in the car after school. He anchored me. He didn't even know it, but he was holding me together every single day. There were times I'd wake up in the middle of the night and just watch him sleep. The curve of his cheek reminded me of Maria. He had her eyes, big, soft, always searching. I used to whisper to her picture, "I'll keep him safe. I promise." I meant every word. I missed her every day. But I learned to keep my grief quiet. I didn't want Daniel to grow up in a home where sadness echoed louder than laughter. So I'd make pancakes on Sundays, sing along with him to cartoon theme songs, pretend I liked all the silly little toys he collected. We had our own rituals. His favorite was midnight popcorn on Fridays. He'd pretend to sneak out of bed, and I'd pretend to catch him, and then we'd share a bowl in front of the old TV. Looking back, those years were hard. But they were also the purest. I didn't have much, not money, not time, not rest. But I had Daniel. And having him felt like holding on to the last warm ember of a fire I was afraid to let go of. I never remarried. People told me I should. Said Daniel needed a mother figure. But I couldn't bring myself to fill that space. Not because I didn't want companionship, but because Maria was still everywhere in our home. Her scent in the closet. Her handwriting on old recipes. The way Daniel would occasionally ask, "What would Mom say if she saw me now?" I didn't want to dilute that. I wanted him to remember her as something whole, not a shadow pushed aside by someone new. There were quiet moments when I let myself wonder what life might have been like if she had lived. But those thoughts were dangerous, they had teeth. So I kept moving. Kept providing. Kept loving Daniel with everything I had left. He was never just a son to me. He was the second half of my soul after Maria took the first half with her. And I made a vow to myself, and to her, that I would raise him with gentleness, with discipline, and with more love than most boys ever get to know. He was the only light I had left after her. And I held on to him, like a man gripping a candle in the dark. Daniel was never a difficult child. He had his moods, like any teenager, but he was never disrespectful. Even in high school, when most boys pulled away from their fathers, Daniel stayed close. We had our traditions: Friday night chili, Sunday morning walks to the corner store. He even delayed going to college for a year just to help me recover from a knee injury. That's the kind of heart he had. Thoughtful. Present. So when the change came, it didn't hit me all at once. It crept in like a slow leak in a ceiling, silent at first, almost invisible. Then suddenly, everything felt soaked. He was 25 when he met Serena. I still remember the first time he mentioned her. "She's smart," he said. "Real classy. Works in social media marketing." I nodded. I didn't know what that meant, but I trusted his judgment. He seemed excited, a little nervous. That made me happy. I wanted him to find someone who brought him peace. But the first time she came to dinner, I felt something off. She complimented the house, but in that polished way people do when they're calculating. She barely looked at me when I spoke. Her phone buzzed twice during the meal, and she checked it both times. Daniel, for the first time in years, seemed nervous around me. Like he was waiting for me to say something embarrassing. After they left, I cleaned up alone. I stared at the sink and wondered, not for the last time, if I was just being overly sensitive. Maybe I was jealous. Not of her, but of the space she was taking in his life. Space that used to belong to us. Over the next few months, the distance grew. Daniel stopped coming by every weekend. Then it was once every 2 weeks. Then not at all unless I called him first. I remember his voice on one of those calls, rushed, distracted. He said, "Sorry, Dad, Serena's got this influencer dinner. I'll make it up to you." He didn't. Birthdays became texts. Our traditions faded like photos left in the sun. It wasn't just the absence, it was the way he looked when he did show up. New designer shoes. A watch I knew he couldn't afford on his salary. He once mentioned they were going to Cabo, just to reset. I didn't even ask how. I didn't want to sound like I was keeping score. But inside, I was worried. Not just about the money, but about what he was turning into. There was a day, maybe 6 months into their relationship, when he came over briefly to drop off some groceries I hadn't asked for. Organic brands I couldn't pronounce. "Serena says you should start eating cleaner," he told me. Then he looked around the house and asked, "You ever think of renovating this place? It could be modernized." I smiled politely. But my heart sank. This was the same house where I read him bedtime stories. Where he built blanket forts in the living room and begged me to leave them up for days. And now, all he saw were outdated cabinets and old carpet. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't cruelty. That's what made it worse. It was indifference. A slow, gentle forgetting of where he came from. I started following Serena's social media out of curiosity. I wish I hadn't. It was a parade of selfies, luxury handbags, branded collaborations. Her captions were always some variation of "spoiled and grateful sparkling heart" or "life's too short not to sparkle gemstone." Daniel showed up in a few, dressed like someone I didn't recognize. In one, he was kissing her cheek, holding a champagne glass. The caption read, "To love and luxury bottle with popping cork sparkles." I sat there with the photo glowing on my old phone screen, wondering how the boy who once made me a macaroni necklace for Father's Day had become this man. I didn't hate Serena. I barely knew her. But I knew what she represented. She was a mirror, and when Daniel looked into it, he no longer saw his roots. He saw what he thought he should be. Wealthy. Important. Flashy. Untouchable. I kept telling myself it was a phase. That he'd wake up one day and remember who he was raised by. That he'd see through the glitter and come home, not physically, but emotionally. I held on to that hope like a fraying rope. But even ropes snap when pulled too long. The last time I saw them together before it all broke apart, we were at a diner. Serena ordered a salad, barely touched it, and scrolled through her phone the entire time. Daniel laughed at her jokes like he was auditioning for approval. I sat there, chewing slowly, listening to my son tell stories with a voice that didn't sound like his own. When we said goodbye, he gave me a side hug and said, "Love you, Pops." But the words felt automated, like something he was checking off a list. I watched them walk to their car. Her heels clicked against the pavement like punctuation marks. He opened the door for her, then got in himself. I stood in that parking lot longer than I should have. And for the first time, I let the question surface fully in my mind. What if I was losing him, not to time or distance, but to someone who made him forget who he was? I don't remember falling. I remember the sound, glass shattering, my head hitting the cabinet on the way down, a dull thud that echoed inside my skull. But the actual fall? It felt like slipping through water. Slow. Heavy. Like my body had given up before my mind caught on. I had only gotten up to make coffee. Just a simple cup. The kettle had started to whistle, and I'd reached for the sugar when everything spun. My legs buckled. My vision doubled. And then, nothing. Just the cold tile under my cheek and the faint scent of burnt toast. I must have blacked out for a few minutes. When I came to, I was still on the floor, half curled under the kitchen counter, knees trembling. I tried to sit up, but my body screamed. My chest felt tight. My limbs wouldn't listen. I stayed there until my breathing slowed, eyes blinking against the morning light creeping in through the window. I don't know how long I sat on that floor. Could have been 20 minutes. Could have been an hour. Eventually, I dragged myself to the armchair in the living room and sat there, shaking, sweating, afraid. That afternoon, I took a cab to the ER. I didn't tell Daniel. They ran a series of tests. Blood work. Scans. The doctor, a soft-spoken woman with tired eyes, looked at me and said, "You've got stage 2 kidney failure. Likely tied to untreated hypertension." I blinked at her, like the words were in a different language. She continued, gently, "You'll need surgery. It's not major, but it's urgent. Medication will follow. Lifestyle changes. Follow-up appointments." I nodded, numb. Then came the paperwork. The numbers. The kind of math that makes your chest hurt before your wallet even opens. The total, $8,200. I asked if there were any state programs. She said, "There's assistance for some parts of it, but not all. And it takes time." Time, I didn't feel I had. I went home that evening with pamphlets, prescriptions, and a new kind of fear in my chest, one that whispered, "What if this is how it ends?" Alone, unwell, and unsure of who to call. It took me 3 days to tell Daniel. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I did. And that made the fear worse. I didn't want to burden him. Didn't want to see the look in his eyes if he felt helpless. But the truth was, I didn't have anyone else to turn to. So I called him. He picked up on the third ring. I heard laughter in the background, Serena's voice, high and bright. Then he stepped away. "Hey, Pops, everything okay?" I cleared my throat. I've had some health trouble. Collapsed the other day. Went to the hospital. Silence. What? Are you okay now? I will be, I said, forcing steadiness. They said it's kidney failure. Early stage. Treatable. I need a procedure. And some medication. But, I paused. It's going to cost more than I can manage right now. How much? About 8,000. Maybe a little more. Another pause. He exhaled. Okay. Let me talk to Serena. We'll figure it out. Don't worry, Dad. I've got you. His voice softened in that last part. And for a moment, I believed it. I hung up the phone and sat there in my chair, staring at the photo on the mantel, me, Maria, and Daniel at his kindergarten graduation. He was missing 2 front teeth and grinning like sunshine. I felt tears rising, but I swallowed them down. Not yet. There was still hope. The next day, Daniel called back. I'll handle it, he said. I'll transfer the money to your account by Friday. Just focus on getting better. I said thank you more times than I needed to. He told me to stop thanking him. That I was his father. That he wanted to help. I believed him. I wanted to believe that the boy I raised, the one who once offered me his entire piggy bank because I looked sad after work, was still in there. That weekend, I started preparing. I followed the hospital's instructions. Made a list of things to pack. Even cleaned the living room, just in case someone needed to stay over and help me recover. I hadn't felt that kind of fragile hope in a long time. A small part of me even thought, maybe this is the moment that brings us closer again. Maybe illness would do what words couldn't. Maybe, just maybe, the son I loved would show up not just with money, but with presence, care, time. I was wrong. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that my body was failing me. And I was trusting someone else to catch me before I fell again. Friday came. Then Saturday. Then Sunday. No deposit. No call. No message. I checked my bank account 3 times a day, refreshing the screen as if that would somehow will the numbers to change. They didn't. The balance sat still, just over $320. Not even enough to cover the first round of medication, let alone the surgery. I told myself there had to be a reason. Maybe he got busy. Maybe Serena had a family emergency. Maybe the transfer was delayed by the bank. Maybe. 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 By Monday, the hospital called. A gentle woman from billing informed me that since payment hadn't come through, my surgery was being pushed off the calendar. We can reschedule once the deposit clears, she said kindly. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence. The kind of silence that hums in your ears and presses against your chest like water. I called Daniel twice that day. No answer. I didn't leave a voicemail. I didn't want to sound desperate. But the truth was. I was. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling fan as it clicked around, over and over. I remembered the way Daniel used to count its rotations as a child to help himself fall asleep. He used to tell me, the ceiling's like a clock, Dad. It keeps spinning even when we're tired. Now, I wished I could stop time. Rewind it. Go back to when he still brought me drawings from school and climbed into bed after nightmares. The betrayal didn't arrive as a phone call or a message. It arrived as a photograph. Tuesday morning, I opened my phone and, without thinking, tapped on Serena's social media story. It was instinct by now, morbid curiosity. She was always posting something. Food. Vacations. Lavish gifts. But this time it hit like a blow to the ribs. A sparkling Cartier bracelet, nestled in a red box, resting on the leather seat of what looked like a luxury car. Her caption read, When he says I deserve the world, gemstone sparkles, thank you baby at Daniel.James. I blinked. Then blinked again. I stared at that post until the edges of my vision went blurry. Cartier. I didn't know much about jewelry. But I knew enough to recognize that red box. And I knew enough to look it up. $7,900. Almost to the dollar, the exact amount I had trusted him with. The money that was supposed to keep me alive. I opened my banking app. Still no deposit. Still no call. Still just $320. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just sat there. Numb. The kind of numb that feels like floating outside your own body. I could hear the refrigerator humming, birds outside chirping. The world hadn't stopped. But something in me had. When the tears finally came, they weren't loud. They weren't dramatic. They were quiet. Slow. The kind of tears that come from something breaking inside, where no one can see. I whispered to myself, he chose her over my life. I said it again. Out loud. And each time, it got heavier. It wasn't about the bracelet. It wasn't even about the money. It was about trust. About a promise made with his arms around me. About the soft voice that said, I've got you, Dad. He didn't. He had me when I was strong. When I had answers. When I was the one carrying him. But now, when I needed to lean on him, he turned away. Or worse, he didn't just turn away. He used my fall to lift her higher. That evening, I sat on the porch and watched the sun go down. The sky was the color of rust. I didn't notice the chill in the air. I didn't care. I thought about Maria. I thought about how hard we worked to raise Daniel with values. With softness. With empathy. And now? Now he was rewarding someone else with diamonds while I was being charged for missed payments at the pharmacy. I didn't call him again. I didn't confront him. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want to hear the excuses. I didn't want to give him a chance to lie. I didn't want to see his face twist into that expression people wear when they realize they've been caught, not sorry, just sorry you noticed. So I sat in the quiet. I sat in the place where fathers go when they realize their sons have become strangers. And in that stillness, I felt something deeper than sadness. I felt the death of a kind of love that only a parent can feel, the unconditional kind. It didn't die all at once. But this? This was the final wound. The knife had already gone in. Now, it had twisted. The worst part wasn't the pain. It wasn't the dull ache in my lower back from kidneys that no longer wanted to function. It wasn't the dizziness or the pounding headaches from blood pressure climbing too high. It wasn't even the tightness in my chest that visited like clockwork after every skipped dose. The worst part was pretending I was okay. I didn't tell anyone that my surgery had been cancelled. When the hospital called to ask if I wanted to reschedule, I said I was still figuring things out. When the pharmacist asked why I hadn't picked up my prescription refill, I told her I was traveling soon and didn't want the pills to expire. Little lies. Harmless lies. Lies told to protect what little pride I had left. I started cutting my pills in half. Then into quarters. I drank more water, hoping to fool my body into thinking it was being helped. Some nights, I just skipped the medication altogether and lay in bed hoping morning wouldn't come too hard. I opened the fridge one evening and realized there was nothing in it except condiments and one bruised apple. That night, I boiled rice and ate it plain. Not because I was nostalgic. Not because I wanted something light. Because that's all I had. I remember staring at the kitchen counter afterward and thinking, how did I get here? Not just physically, but emotionally. How did I become a man rationing his medicine and hiding it from the world? How did I go from someone who gave, to someone who had to beg? That's what it would have felt like, to call Daniel again. Like begging. And I'd rather suffer quietly than do that. I told myself I still had dignity. Even if it was crumbling. Even if it had to wear second-hand coats and eat plain rice. But that illusion only lasted until I opened the small wooden box in my bedroom. Inside it was Maria's wedding ring. Simple. Silver. No diamond. Just a smooth band with our initials etched inside, M and T, always. I had kept it for decades. Not because of the metal, but because it was hers. Because it still carried her warmth, somehow. Because when I held it, I remembered the way her fingers curled into mine when we used to walk down the street together. But that night, I placed it into a soft pouch and listed it on an auction website. Starting bid, $180. I told myself it was temporary. That I could buy it back one day. That it was just a ring. But the truth is, it felt like selling the last piece of her. Like pawning off my memories just to survive. 3 days later, a buyer messaged me. Local. Cash. No questions asked. When I handed over the pouch, I didn't look him in the eye. I walked home with the money in my pocket and the taste of metal in my mouth. The next morning, I took out the trash and nearly collapsed again. I gripped the fence for balance and saw Gloria from next door watering her plants. She squinted over, frowning. "You okay?" she asked. I smiled, tight, polite. "Just tired." She didn't buy it. I could tell. Later that afternoon, she knocked on my door with a small pot of soup. Chicken and vegetables. "You've lost weight," she said softly, not unkindly. "You're looking smaller." That phrase hit harder than it should have. Not sick. Not older. Just smaller. And she was right. I felt smaller. In every way. Like a man shrinking into the corners of his own life. Folding himself inward so no one would notice the cracks. Disappearing not with drama, but with quiet. I thanked her, of course. Smiled. Took the soup. But when I closed the door, I leaned against it and let the weight of everything fall. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to age with some grace. Maybe not in luxury, but at least in dignity. I had imagined a retirement where I tended to a small garden, maybe watched old westerns in peace, took evening walks with my son. I never imagined I'd be skipping meals so I could afford blood pressure meds. I never imagined I'd be hiding sickness just to avoid shame. I never imagined I'd feel invisible in the very life I built with my own hands. Daniel hadn't just taken my money. He'd taken my ability to ask for help. Because once someone you love abandons you like that, it changes how you see yourself. You start wondering if maybe you don't matter anymore. If maybe everyone sees what they see, and just keeps walking. But I didn't want pity. Not from Daniel. Not from anyone. I wanted to be seen. Heard. Treated like a man whose life still held weight. Even if my son had forgotten that. I hadn't. Not yet. I hadn't told Gloria everything. She saw enough to worry, the thinning frame, the labored breathing, the silences that lasted too long. But I hadn't spoken the full truth out loud. Not even once. Not to anyone. Until one night, I found her knocking at my door again, holding another pot of soup. This time, lentil. I thanked her, but she didn't leave right away. She hovered in the doorway, eyes scanning my face like she was looking for something I was trying hard to hide. "You know," she said gently, "I was a nurse before I retired." I didn't answer. "You've got the look," she continued. "The one I used to see on patients who didn't want anyone fussing over them." I gave her a tired smile, the kind that tries to deflect without lying. But something about her tone made me fold just a little. "I was supposed to have surgery," I said finally. "Kidney procedure." Nothing huge. But it got cancelled, because I couldn't pay. Her expression didn't change. She just nodded, like she already knew. Then, softly, "Does Daniel know?" I hesitated. "Yes," I said. "He did." I didn't explain further. I didn't need to. She placed the soup on the table and said, "I want to bring someone by tomorrow. Just to talk." I started to protest, but she raised a hand. "No pressure. Just listen. That's all." The next afternoon, her son came by. Aaron. He looked about 35, with a tidy beard and eyes that belonged to someone who'd already seen too much. "Lawyer," Gloria said. "Family law, estate protection, elder rights." He introduced himself with a calm voice and sat across from me like someone entering sacred ground. "I know you don't know me," he said, "but my mom told me a little. You're not alone, sir. And you don't have to handle this in the dark." I didn't speak. He continued, "There are laws in Kansas protecting seniors from financial exploitation. What happened to you? If your son knowingly took funds you needed for medical care, that qualifies. I can help you file a civil report. We can freeze any further access to your retirement or insurance." I shook my head. "He's my son. I'm not taking him to court. I'm not suggesting criminal charges. Just protection. Boundaries. You wouldn't be doing it to punish him. You'd be doing it to keep yourself safe." I leaned back in the chair, hands folded across my stomach. I didn't want this. I wanted the boy who promised to protect me. I wanted to go back. But going back wasn't an option. I was tired of choosing between pride and survival. After a long silence, I said, "What would it involve?" He smiled, small, respectful. "Just paperwork for now. No courtrooms. We submit a declaration and freeze access to any joint accounts or benefits. It keeps things from getting worse." Gloria came by later that evening after Aaron left. She didn't ask me what I decided. She just handed me a small bag of groceries and said, "You've got more people on your side than you think." I went to bed that night feeling something I hadn't in weeks. Not hope exactly. Not strength. But protection. The next morning, I signed the forms. Aaron filed them that afternoon. Later that week, I got a call from my bank. They confirmed that access to my small retirement fund had been legally restricted, only I could authorize withdrawals now. It wasn't much. But it was something. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had pulled a thread of control back into my hands. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't call to explain or accuse. Let the silence speak for me. Let the legal protection stand where love had once been. Gloria kept checking in, bringing meals, asking if I'd taken my meds, offering to drive me to appointments. She never pried. Never guilted me. Just showed up. And that meant more than any apology ever could. Sometimes, kindness from the outside hits harder than betrayal from the inside. Because it reminds you, you still matter. That even if your own blood forgets you, some people still see the weight of your life. Aaron warned me the paperwork might draw attention. "It's a public filing," he said. "Nothing scandalous, but sometimes these stories find their way to the surface." I told him I didn't care. At least, that's what I said. The truth? I wasn't sure. I'd spent weeks building a wall around my shame, keeping it quiet, manageable, mine. But when pain becomes paperwork, it leaves your hands. It starts floating into the world, looking for eyes. And the eyes found it. 2 weeks after the legal protection order was filed, I got a voicemail from a woman named Rachel Sanchez. She was a journalist at a local paper, small-town columnist who focused on senior issues. Gloria had worked with her years ago during a neighborhood fundraiser. Apparently, Rachel had seen my name in a routine court bulletin. Her message was polite. Careful. Mr. Thomas, I'd like to write about elder vulnerability, particularly financial abuse within families. You wouldn't be named. But your story could help others. At first, I deleted the message. But that night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall for a long time. Would sharing it make me feel exposed? Yes. But would it also stop another father from sitting in the dark, cutting pills in half, wondering why his child had forgotten how to love him? Maybe. So I called her back. We met at a diner the following afternoon. I wore my cleanest shirt and ironed the collar twice. She was kind, asked more about my life than my case. Asked about Maria. About Daniel as a boy. She didn't write much as I spoke. Just listened. That surprised me. The article ran that Sunday. Front page of the community section, left behind, when blood fails our elders. There was no picture of me. No mention of names or neighborhoods. But to anyone who knew me, or knew Daniel, it was obvious. The story detailed how some aging parents are quietly exploited by their adult children. It talked about the emotional toll. The financial wounds. The silence. And somewhere in the middle, it included a quote from me. It's not the money that hurts. It's realizing the one you raised might not see you anymore, not as a parent, not as a person. It was the truth. I expected a few calls from old friends. What I didn't expect was him. Daniel showed up at my door the next morning. Not a call. Not a text. He was just there. I hadn't seen his face in weeks. Months, maybe. Not since the night he told me not to worry. Not since he'd promised to handle everything. His eyes were red. Not from crying, but from lack of sleep, maybe rage. Maybe both. You really had to do this, he snapped before I could say anything. You had to put it all out there. You couldn't just talk to me. I stood in the doorway, unsure whether to let him in. I did talk to you, I said. Calm. Even. He laughed bitterly. Not like this. Now people are calling me. Messaging me. Asking me what I did. You made me look like a monster. I didn't use your name, I replied. But if your conscience recognizes itself in that story, maybe that says more than I ever could. He blinked. His mouth opened. Then closed. I watched the words die behind his teeth. He looked smaller somehow. Not just physically. But inside. Like a balloon leaking air, slowly, invisibly deflating. You don't know what I've been dealing with, he said, quieter now. I don't, I replied. Because you never told me. You just disappeared. There was a long silence. Then he shook his head. I was trying to make her happy. I thought if I gave her something big, she'd see me. Stay. And did she? I asked. He looked down. Didn't answer. That was answer enough. He didn't step into the house. He didn't ask to. Just stood there for a minute longer, as if the threshold itself was too heavy to cross. Then he turned and walked back to his car. I closed the door slowly. Later that evening, Gloria dropped off a tin of biscuits and said, he looked wrecked, you know. I saw him pacing outside for 10 minutes before he knocked. I nodded. But I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. Just tired. The kind of tired that comes after a storm, not because it passed, but because you had to stand in it alone. If your child shamed you publicly, would you still open your door if they came back? Be honest below, the storm didn't end after he left my doorstep. It just moved, somewhere deeper. Into him. I didn't hear from Daniel for weeks after that morning. Not a message. Not a knock. The silence didn't sting the same way it used to. I'd already grown used to it, like a dull ache you stop noticing after enough time. But something in the air shifted. Gloria told me one afternoon, while watering her marigolds, he looks thinner lately. Gaunt. Eyes sunken in. I think he's unraveling. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to ask more. Part of me didn't want to know. A few days later, I got a Facebook message. From a name I didn't recognize. Anthony Vasquez. The profile picture was of a young man in a suit, standing next to Daniel at some party. I opened the message and read. Sir, I hope this isn't inappropriate. I'm Daniel's friend. Or. I was. He's not doing well. Serena left him. Returned the bracelet. He's lost his job. Says he doesn't sleep. He told me what happened with you. He said he broke something he doesn't know how to fix. I stared at those words for a long time. He broke something he doesn't know how to fix. I leaned back in my chair and looked around my living room. The sagging couch. The faded curtains. The clock that had ticked through more pain than joy this past year. And then I cried. Not out of pity. But because the boy who once saved drawings just to make me smile was now crumbling, and I couldn't stop it. He'd made his choices. God knows he had. But even now, some part of me still saw the child, not the man. The one who used to jump into my arms after school. The one who used to write, "I love you, Daddy," in uneven crayon letters. I opened the old voicemail. I don't know why. I hadn't played it in years. Maybe I just needed to hear something true. His voice, age 10, crackled through the speaker. Night, Daddy. I love you more than cake. More than cartoons. Even more than pizza. Don't forget. It broke me. Not in a loud, shattering way. But quietly. The kind of breaking that happens like erosion, slow, steady, irreversible. I placed the phone down and rested my hand over my chest. My heart wasn't just failing from illness anymore. It was failing from memory. From love that had no place to land. Daniel didn't come by. But Gloria said he was around. Said he'd parked outside my house a few times but never got out of the car. Just sat there, engine running, staring at the door. I thought about opening it. But I didn't. Because this wasn't a story where forgiveness came easy. This was a story about consequences. About learning how fragile relationships are, how they can crack even without shouting or slamming doors. Just silence. Just neglect. And glitter. So much glitter. I remember Serena's posts. The hotels, the champagne, the soft flecks of luxury. And I thought, how many people get seduced by the shine? How many trade in their roots for something that sparkles but never lasts? Daniel had. And now the sparkle had dimmed. Serena left. Of course she did. Glitter doesn't stay where the lights go out. And now he was left in the hollow. The space between who he was and who he pretended to be. That's the thing no one tells you about betrayal. When it comes from your own child, it doesn't just hurt. It changes you. It changes them, too. And maybe that was happening now. Maybe he was finally standing in the ruins of what he'd done, not as the victim of his choices, but as the architect. I didn't celebrate his downfall. I didn't rejoice in Serena leaving or the job loss. Because even now, I still wanted him to rise. But I also knew that before someone can come home, they have to feel the emptiness of leaving. Daniel was in that emptiness now. And I wasn't going to fill it for him. He'd have to sit in it. Feel the echo of what he'd thrown away. And only then, would I know if he was coming back as my son. Or just another man looking for a place to hide from the consequences he built. It was a Tuesday evening when he came back. Rain tapped gently against the windows, the kind of drizzle that soaks into everything without ever making a sound. I was sitting in my armchair, sipping lukewarm tea, flipping through an old photo album I hadn't opened in years. Daniel, 6 years old, missing his front teeth, grinning with wild joy after winning a school raffle. I traced the edge of the photo with my thumb, wondering if that little boy still existed somewhere inside the man he'd become. That's when I heard it. A soft knock. Hesitant. 2 quick taps, then silence. I didn't move at first. Just sat still, letting the sound linger in the air. Another knock followed. Louder this time. Like he'd built up the nerve to try again. When I opened the door, there he was. Soaked from the rain, hoodie clinging to him, hair plastered to his forehead. He looked thinner. Paler. But it was the eyes that struck me, tired, sunken, but not defiant. Not angry. Just empty. He held something in his hand, a folded receipt, damp at the edges. I refunded it, he said, voice barely above a whisper. The bracelet. Got most of it back. I didn't look at the paper. I just stepped aside. Come in before you catch cold. He hesitated for a second, then walked in slowly, like every step took effort. Like the walls of this house were heavier than they used to be. We didn't speak right away. He sat on the edge of the couch, dripping onto the worn rug. I went to the kitchen and returned with a towel. Handed it to him without a word. He took it, eyes cast down, and began patting his face and arms. I'm not here to make excuses, he said after a moment. I needed to see you. I nodded, but didn't respond. He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the photos, the old clock, the small plant Gloria had brought over last week. All the things that stayed. I messed up, he said, voice cracking. I thought I was doing something romantic. Something big. Serena always talked about how no one ever spoiled her. I wanted to be that person. You were already someone, I said quietly. You didn't have to buy a title. He looked down at his hands, rubbed them together like they were cold. Or guilty. I know I failed you, he whispered. And it wasn't just the money. It was everything after. The silence. The hiding. I was ashamed. Still am. I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't have words, but because I wasn't ready to hand them over just yet. After a while, I said, there's stew in the fridge. I can heat some up. He looked up, surprised. You sure? No, I said honestly. But you're already here. He nodded, and I went to the kitchen. The microwave hummed as I watched him from the corner of my eye, still hunched, towel resting in his lap, glancing occasionally at the photos on the mantel like they were memories he wasn't sure he still deserved. We ate in silence. The kind of silence that isn't awkward, but dense. Heavy. Full of things that might one day be said, but not tonight. After dinner, he stood by the door, unsure of what came next. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. I don't even know if I'd forgive me. I looked at him, really looked. The stubble on his chin. The worry lines that hadn't been there a year ago. The eyes that were once full of ambition now clouded with something closer to grief. I'm not ready, I said simply. He nodded, as if he'd already prepared himself for that. I'll come by next week. If that's okay. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just opened the door. As he stepped outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. He turned back once, eyes searching my face for something, acceptance, maybe. Or hope. But I kept my expression even. Because forgiveness isn't a handshake. It's not a hug at the door. It's not an apology over stew. It's a road. And tonight, all he'd done was show up at the start of it. When the door closed, I sat back down in my chair. I didn't cry. But I didn't breathe easy either. Because love, real love, doesn't just return and expect to be welcomed. It stands on the porch in the rain, and waits. Have you ever had to forgive someone while your heart was still bleeding? Tell me how you did it. Daniel comes by every Sunday now. It started with groceries. Just small things, a bag of apples, a loaf of bread, some canned soup. He never made a big deal out of it. Just dropped them off on the counter and asked, "Need anything else?" The first time he asked, I shook my head. The second time, I said, "Toilet paper." The third time, I asked him to stay for dinner. He said yes. We don't talk about the bracelet. Or the money. Or Serena. Not directly. But I see it in the way he listens now. He never used to listen like this. Not really. Now, when I speak, he watches my face like the words might disappear if he looks away. He asks about old recipes. About Mom. About what he was like as a child. Last Sunday, I found him looking through one of Maria's cookbooks, the one with the notes she scribbled in the margins. He didn't say anything. But I saw the way his thumb lingered on a smudged ink heart she had drawn next to her lemon cake recipe. He's not the same man who stood in that doorway months ago, holding a crumpled receipt in the rain. He's quieter now. Softer. There's a heaviness in him that wasn't there before, the kind that only comes from realizing you've broken something you can't fully fix. He doesn't ask for forgiveness. Not outright. But he brings it with him in small ways. In the way he refills my pillbox without being asked. In how he oils the hinges on the front door. In how he checks the thermostat before he leaves. And I haven't said, "I forgive you." Because I'm not there yet. I might never fully be. But I've let go of the anger. I've let go of the part of me that expected him to be perfect. He's not. Neither am I. I still write letters to Maria. Not as often. But every now and then, I sit by her photo and tell her everything, about Daniel's slow return, about the silence between us that no longer hurts as much as it used to. Sometimes I wonder what she'd say about all of this. Maybe she'd tell me to stop holding on to pain like it's a souvenir. Maybe she'd remind me that love is a cycle, beautiful, brutal, always circling back in ways we never expect. Daniel isn't the boy he used to be. And I'm not the father I once was. But something new is forming between us. Something quieter. Something honest. A few weeks ago, he was leaving after lunch when he paused in the hallway. He turned back and said, "I was wrong, Dad. About everything. About who I thought I needed to be." He didn't wait for me to respond. He just stood there for a second longer, then left. After he closed the door, I sat in that hallway for a while. It was the same place I used to wait in when Maria was in labor with him. The same hallway where he'd run to me crying after nightmares. The same hallway where I used to measure his height on the wall, marking it with dates and scribbles and proud little exclamation marks. And now, here I was, an old man in a quiet house, sitting in that same hallway, listening to the silence he left behind. But this time, it didn't feel hollow. It felt like something had finally settled. Not finished. Not forgiven. But softened. Love, I've learned, doesn't always shout or even speak. Sometimes it just shows up again. Even after it's failed you. Even after it's forgotten you. Even after it's chosen someone else. It shows up with apples and old cookbooks and steady hands that now know how to care. And sometimes, when you least expect it, love becomes something else entirely. Not redemption. Not revenge. But grace. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't fix what broke. but chooses to sit beside it anyway. I haven't forgiven him fully. But sometimes grace walks in quietly, and sits beside the wound without asking to be healed.